Tonight, before you drift into sleep, I would like to invite you on a rather unusual journey, not to the towering pyramids of Egypt, not to the lost cities of the Maya, and not to the magnificent palaces of ancient kings. Tonight, our journey begins with something far simpler, a loaf of bread. On an ordinary day, we rarely give much thought to bread. It sits on the breakfast table each morning. It appears in hurried meals. Sometimes it becomes such a small part of everyday life that we hardly notice its presence at all. Yet if we look a little deeper, we discover that within a simple loaf of bread lies a story stretching back tens of thousands of years. A story of soil and seeds, of the first farmers sowing wheat beside ancient rivers, of invisible microorganisms quietly performing the miracle of fermentation, and of how a food that seems so ordinary helped shape the destiny of human civilization itself. Carl Gustav Jung believed that the most ordinary things often conceal the deepest symbols. Behind what is familiar, there are always layers of meaning that we rarely pause to explore. And bread may be one of those symbols. It is food, but it is also memory. It is a product of science, but also the result of patience. It is an everyday meal, yet at the same time a silent witness to history. On tonight's journey, we will explore some of the most fascinating and relaxing facts about bread. We will discover how bread emerged before many ancient cities existed, how the tiny organisms inside sourdough create an invisible living world, how entire empires were built upon the supply of bread, and why the aroma of a freshly baked loaf possesses the remarkable power to awaken humanity's deepest memories. If you enjoy gentle historical stories, thoughtful insights into the human mind, and journeys that help the soul unwind before sleep, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Each week, we will explore simple stories that contain profound secrets about humanity, civilization, and life itself. But for now, find a comfortable position. Allow your eyes to slowly relax. Listen to the winds of ancient wheat fields whispering from the distant past, and let us begin the extraordinary story of a loaf of bread. Bread, the invention that changed human civilization. Tonight, as the outside world gradually settles into the stillness of night, I would like to invite you to look closely at something so familiar that we often stop noticing it altogether: a loaf of bread. Perhaps this morning someone enjoyed a piece of toast alongside a cup of coffee. Perhaps somewhere in the world, a baker has just removed golden loaves from the oven. And perhaps right now, in the kitchen of a small family home, the scent of freshly baked bread is quietly drifting through the air. Yet the strange thing is that the more familiar something becomes, the easier it is to forget the extraordinary nature hidden within it. Because if there is any object that deserves to be called the oldest companion of human civilization, it is probably not the sword, not money, and not the throne of kings. It is bread. Carl Gustav Jung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." Whenever I read those words, I find myself thinking about human history. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors faced the most fundamental problem of all. How do we survive? How do we find enough food for tomorrow? How do we prevent winter from becoming a death sentence? How do we ensure that children born today grow strong and healthy? Today, we often view history through the lens of wars, empires, and revolutions. Yet much of humanity's true history revolved around a far simpler question: what will we eat tomorrow? And it was in the effort to answer that question that bread emerged. It is difficult to determine the exact moment in history when an ancient human first ground grains into flour, mixed them with water, and placed the mixture upon a heated stone. No chronicle recorded it. No king claimed the achievement. No monument was erected in its honor. It was probably an entirely ordinary moment, a small experiment, a fortunate accident, an invention so humble that no one realized it would eventually change the world. Yet history often changes in exactly this way, not through thunder, but through the smallest movements. Jung believed that deep within the collective unconscious exist patterns that have accompanied humanity since the beginning. One of these patterns is the image of the nurturer, the one who brings life, the one who protects the community from hunger. Viewed from that perspective, bread is more than food. It is a symbol of security, a symbol of stability, a symbol of the feeling that tomorrow still holds hope. For thousands of years, a healthy wheat field meant survival. A failed harvest meant disaster. A full granary meant peace. An empty granary meant unrest. This elevated bread far beyond its nutritional value. It became the foundation of society itself. Imagine a morning 10,000 years ago. The sun has just risen above the horizon. A group of prehistoric people awaken beside their small settlement. They know nothing of nations, nothing of cities, nothing of writing, nothing of money. Yet they know one thing: the wild grasses growing around them can be harvested, they can be ground, they can be cooked, and they can help them survive another day. From that simple realization, a remarkable chain of events began. Human beings learned how to cultivate, how to harvest, how to store, how to control their food supply, and from that, civilization slowly emerged. Many historians believe that the development of agriculture was the greatest turning point in human history. But perhaps we can say the same about bread, because growing wheat was only the first step. What truly mattered was transforming those grains into a food that could be stored, transported, and shared, and bread was the answer. There is something beautiful about that journey. A tiny seed grows from the earth. Humans harvest it, grind it into flour, mix it with water, and then use fire to create something entirely new. Earth, water, fire, time. The most ancient elements of nature come together within a loaf of bread. Seen through Jung's eyes, this is almost an alchemical symbol, a transformation, a process of matter changing from one form into another, from seed to nourishment, from nature to culture, from wild existence to civilization. Yet the story becomes even more miraculous when humanity accidentally discovers fermentation. Perhaps, somewhere in the distant past, a mixture of flour and water was left unattended for too long. Microorganisms in the air began their work. The dough started to rise. Its aroma changed. Its texture changed. And once again, history shifted because of a tiny accident. Human beings discovered that invisible living creatures were working alongside them. No one could see them. No one understood them. Yet they were there, quietly, patiently, transforming the world little by little. Whenever I think about this, I am reminded of one of Jung's most beautiful ideas, that most of what shapes our lives does not exist on the surface. It exists in the invisible depths, like yeast within bread dough, like the unconscious within the soul. You cannot see it, yet you can see the results it creates. And for thousands of years afterward, bread would continue shaping human history in much the same way. Not as a king, not as a general, but as a foundational force, quiet, yet indispensable. Because sometimes the things that keep the world running are not the loudest things. They are the simplest, the things that appear on our tables every day, the things we often forget to thank. And perhaps there is no clearer example than bread, the hidden science inside a loaf of bread. As we concluded the previous chapter, the loaf of bread appeared before us as a silent witness to human history. It traveled alongside the first farmers. It nourished the first cities. It sat upon the tables of kings, soldiers, and ordinary workers alike. But tonight, I would like to invite you to come a little closer, not to look at the history of bread, but to look inside it, because there is something rather remarkable. While many human inventions are built from metal, engines, or electricity, bread is made from things that seem astonishingly simple: a little flour, a little water, a little salt, a little time, and sometimes tiny living creatures too small for the naked eye to see. Yet from these humble ingredients, something extraordinary emerges. A loaf that can be as soft as a cloud, fragrant and comforting, perfectly crisp, capable of sustaining humanity for thousands of years. Viewed through the eyes of a scientist, this is an incredibly complex chain of biological, chemical, and physical reactions. But viewed through the eyes of Carl Jung, it carries another meaning entirely. It reminds us that the simplest things in life often contain depths we rarely notice. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." A loaf of bread is much the same. From the outside, it is merely food. But once we look within, we begin to see an entire world at work. A world of living organisms, molecules, invisible force, natural laws that existed for billions of years before human beings appeared. Perhaps that is what makes bread so special. It is not something created against nature. It is something created in partnership with nature. Let us begin with the smallest living creatures, yeast. When a baker mixes flour, water, and yeast together, the first thing that happens is not magic. It is biology. The yeast cells begin to awaken. They are like tiny workers rising from a long sleep. Around them lies an abundance of food. The starch within the flour begins breaking down into simpler sugars. The yeast consumes those sugars, and like all living creatures, it produces waste. What is fascinating is that the waste produced by yeast happens to be exactly what we need. Carbon dioxide, called DOIs, tiny bubbles of gas begin appearing throughout the dough. At first, only a few, then more and more. If you could somehow shrink yourself and step inside that dough, you would witness something resembling a sky filled with invisible balloons slowly inflating. Millions, millions of tiny gas bubbles, quietly, patiently, expanding little by little. But gas alone is not enough, because if there were only gas, it would simply escape. The dough would never rise. And that is when another important character enters the story: gluten. Today, gluten is often discussed in conversations about nutrition. But from a baker's perspective, gluten is one of nature's greatest inventions. When flour meets water and is kneaded, two major groups of proteins begin connecting with one another. Together, they form an elastic network, an invisible web, a living framework. Its purpose is to hold on to the gas bubbles produced by the yeast. Imagine blowing air into a balloon. The air can only expand the balloon because the rubber keeps it contained. Gluten is that rubber. It allows bread to become bread, not a dense and heavy mass of dough, but something soft, light, and filled with air. This always reminds me of a beautiful idea within Jungian psychology. Human beings are much like that dough. Within us exists immense potential, dreams, ideas, aspirations. But potential can only grow when it is supported by structure. Just as gas needs gluten, the soul also needs values, principles, and experiences to create the framework necessary for growth. Without that framework, potential disperses. Without gluten, the gas escapes. Without inner structure, psychological energy scatters. And then perhaps the most remarkable thing of all occurs. Something invisible begins changing the shape of something visible. Gas has no color, no scent, no physical form that can be held, yet it causes the entire mass of dough to expand. That always makes me think about the invisible forces that shape our own lives. Belief, memory, love, hope. No one can see them, yet they possess the power to transform human beings. Just as yeast gas transforms dough, just as the unconscious transforms a life, if we look closely, the entire process of bread making seems to be a dialogue between the visible and the invisible. Flour is visible, gas is invisible, yet both must coexist. One creates substance, the other creates life. One is the body, the other is the breath, and it is their balance that creates the miracle. When a baker places their hands upon fermenting dough, They are not merely touching flour, they are touching an ecosystem at work, a miniature biological world, a natural laboratory, a tiny universe where billions of reactions unfold simultaneously. It is astonishing to realize that all of this happens in complete silence. No engines, no machinery, no flashing lights, only time, and the ancient laws of nature quietly doing their work. Perhaps this is why making bread feels almost meditative to so many people. Because it reminds us that not everything valuable needs to be forced. Some things simply require time, like dough, like trees, like the growth of the soul. The more we try to rush the process, the more we disrupt it. The more patiently we wait, the greater the reward becomes. And while the dough continues growing in that silence, a new chapter of the story waits ahead. For when the bread enters the oven, biology gradually gives way to physics and chemistry. An entirely different world awakens. A world where heat transforms everything, where color emerges, where aroma is born, and where the loaf of bread finally becomes the thing we recognize today, the ancient origins of bread. As the loaf emerged from the oven in the previous chapter, carrying with it the warm fragrance of biology, chemistry, and time, we witnessed something beautiful. Within that familiar food, an entire miniature universe of natural laws was unfolding. But tonight, I would like to invite you to travel even farther, far beyond modern kitchens, far beyond artisan bakeries, far beyond the first ancient cities. Together, we will journey back to a world almost impossible to imagine. A world without nations, without money, without writing, without empires, without paved roads, without towers reaching toward the sky. A world in which most human beings still survived through hunting and gathering. And astonishingly, it was in that distant world that the story of bread began. There is something about the origin of bread that has always moved me deeply. Many famous inventions throughout history are associated with powerful individuals, kings, conquerors, scholars, but bread is different. It was not born in a palace. It did not emerge from an academy. It was not the creation of a single genius. It was created by countless ordinary people. Women grinding seeds, men gathering wild grains, small families searching for ways to find more food for tomorrow. Carl Jung believed that certain symbols appear again and again across all cultures because they reflect humanity's deepest needs. Viewed through that lens, bread may be one of the oldest symbols of all. Long before we built temples, we faced the challenge of survival. How do we transform nature into food? How do we preserve the energy of summer for winter? How do we protect life against the uncertainty of the world? And from those questions, bread slowly emerged. Today, archaeologists believe that primitive forms of bread may have appeared more than 12,000 years ago. That means bread is older than many things we commonly regard as foundations of civilization. It appeared before currency, before writing, before great cities, before pyramids, before famous empires, even before many fully developed forms of agriculture. Whenever I think about that, I find it wonderfully paradoxical. We often tell history through its grandest achievements, yet sometimes the things that change the world are the humblest. A seed, a loaf, a meal, a small discovery beside a fire. Perhaps one afternoon, thousands of generations ago, a group of ancient people sat around stones heated by flame. In their hands were wild grains gathered from nearby grasslands. Those tiny seeds were crushed between stones, mixed with water, and placed upon a hot surface. No one knows exactly what happened next, but it may very well have been the moment one of the first breads was born. Not risen, not soft, not fragrant like modern bread, simply a flat cake. Yet within it lived a profound idea, the idea that human beings could transform nature, could intervene in food, could create something that had never existed before. Jung described the development of consciousness as a journey away from complete dependence upon nature. In a sense, That first bread represented a small step on that journey. It was no longer a grain in its original form. It had become a product of human intelligence, a collaboration between nature and consciousness. And from there, the story spread. What is remarkable is that bread did not appear in just one place. It appeared almost everywhere, in different lands, within cultures that had no contact with one another. Humanity seemed to keep arriving at the same idea. Take grain, grind it, mix it with liquid, cook it with heat, create food. It is almost as though the need for survival guided civilizations toward the same discovery. This reminds me of Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. He believed that people in different places often create similar symbols without direct contact, not because they copy one another, but because they share the same deep human needs. Perhaps bread is another example of this phenomenon, not an idea spreading outward from a single center, but a solution repeatedly rediscovered by humanity. In the Middle East, people created thin flatbreads baked upon hot stones. Across South Asia, naan emerged from glowing clay ovens. In Ethiopia, injera was made from teff grain and fermented into soft, edible sheets. In Central America, tortillas made from corn became the foundation of entire civilizations. In Northern Europe, where the cold climate was less suitable for wheat, people developed rye bread. Every land told its own story. Every culture created its own recipe. Every loaf carried the flavor of local climate, soil, and history. Yet at the same time, they were all strangely alike, because beneath those differences lay the same idea, the same longing, the same ancient need to nourish people, to create community, to transform seeds into life. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about the history of bread. It shows us that no matter how different our languages, skin colors, or cultures may be, human beings have always shared the same fundamental needs. We all need food. We all need safety. We all need a sense of belonging. We all need hope that tomorrow will be better than today. Perhaps that is why bread became a kind of silent language, a language that existed long before the first written words, a language understood by every civilization, a language written with seeds, fire, and time. And as the first breads continued spreading throughout the ancient world, they quietly prepared the way for a far greater revolution. Because bread did not merely help humanity survive, it would soon help humanity settle, help create larger communities, help establish the first villages, and ultimately help build the first cities in human history. But that is a story we will explore in the next chapter. Sourdough, a living world inside a small jar. In the previous chapter, we traveled back through time to the earliest days when human beings first began grinding grains into flour and placing them upon heated stones. From the Middle East to Africa, from the plains of India to the highlands of Central America, the first breads emerged as a shared language of humanity, a language that required no writing, no borders, no empires, only seeds, water, and fire. But then, at some forgotten moment in history, something curious happened. An ancient baker may have left a portion of dough unattended for longer than usual. Perhaps it was a hot day. Perhaps an unexpected rainstorm interrupted the work. Perhaps it was simply chance. But when that person returned, the dough had changed. It no longer looked the same. It had risen. It was softer, lighter, and carried an entirely new aroma. No one knows what that first baker thought. Perhaps surprise, perhaps suspicion, perhaps curiosity. But it is very possible that when that loaf was finally baked, humanity unknowingly stepped into a new chapter in the history of bread. The chapter of sourdough, the chapter of invisible organisms, the chapter of a living world quietly thriving inside a small jar. Perhaps what I love most about sourdough is not its flavor, but the story it tells, because sourdough reminds us that life is often far richer and more complex than what the naked eye can see. Carl Gustav Jung spent his entire life exploring the invisible depths of the human mind. He believed that much of what shapes our lives does not exist on the surface of consciousness. It exists in deeper regions we cannot directly observe. Whenever I think about sourdough, I am reminded of that idea, because from the outside, a jar of starter appears completely ordinary, just flour and water, a simple mixture, something seemingly still and quiet, yet inside it, an entire world is in motion, a miniature ecosystem, a vibrant community, a continuous dialogue among countless tiny living beings. If we could magnify that jar millions of times, we would witness something extraordinary. Billions of yeast cells at work, billions of lactic acid bacteria growing and multiplying. These tiny organisms share the same living space, consume the same nutrients, create new compounds, and transform the environment around them. At first glance, this may seem like competition, but the reality is far more subtle. The yeast and bacteria within sourdough do not merely compete, they cooperate, they regulate one another, they create a delicate yet enduring balance, and it is that balance that produces the miracle bakers call a starter. There has always seemed to me something profoundly human about this story, because we, too, live within invisible ecosystems, families, communities, societies, relationships, memories, values. No one exists entirely alone. No soul is ever truly isolated. Jung described this truth in many different ways throughout his work, but perhaps the core idea was always the same. Human beings become themselves only through their relationships with the world around them. Sourdough is no different. A single yeast cell does not create a starter. A single bacterium does not create a starter. Only when they coexist, adapt together, grow together, does a new ecosystem emerge. The remarkable thing is that this balance is never static. It is always changing. Each time a baker feeds a starter with fresh flour and water, the ecosystem adjusts. Some populations increase, others decline. Certain microbial strains disappear, others emerge. Yet somehow, the entire system continues to survive, like a forest, like a river, like a city, or like the human soul. The surface changes, yet the essence remains. Perhaps this is why many bakers speak about their starter as though it were a living creature. They give it a name, they care for it, they observe its moods, they learn to understand the subtle signals it sends. A healthy starter rises, releases pleasant aromas, appears full of life. A struggling starter becomes sluggish, weak, or changes its scent. It may sound strange, yet experienced bakers often feel they are building a relationship with whatever is living inside that jar. And perhaps they are not entirely wrong, because biologically speaking, it truly is a living community, a community they nurture every day. This brings us to one of the most touching aspects of sourdough, its lifespan. Most things we own have limits. Objects break, food spoils, buildings deteriorate, but a starter is different. If properly cared for, it can live for a very long time. Not merely months, not merely years, but decades, even longer. There are still starters in the world today that have been passed down through multiple generations. Some families have maintained the same starter for nearly a century. Some bakeries preserve their starter as part of their own history. Whenever I think about this, I find it deeply moving. Because when someone passes a starter to their children or grandchildren, they are not simply passing down a recipe, they are passing down a living organism, a piece of memory, a piece of time, a piece of their own life. And here, sourdough once again touches upon a theme deeply familiar in Jung's thinking: the transmission of memory, not only through words, not only through books, but through things that are alive, things that continue to exist from one generation to the next. An old starter is like a diary written without ink. It is written with microorganisms, with time, with care. with the hands that have lovingly tended that jar through the years. And that is what makes sourdough more than a baking ingredient. It becomes a story, a legacy, a living organism carrying the memory of people who once existed. Yet the most remarkable aspect of sourdough still lies ahead, because no two starters in the world are exactly alike. And that uniqueness tells us an even deeper story about nature, identity, and individuality, both in bread and in human beings. Perhaps the greatest miracle of sourdough is not how long it can live, but the fact that no two starters in the world are exactly the same. At first, this may seem difficult to believe. After all, the basic recipe for a starter appears incredibly simple. Just flour and water. So why do two jars raised according to the same recipe fail to become perfect copies of one another? The answer lies in a much deeper truth. Every place in the world possesses its own ecosystem. The air of Paris is different from the air of San Francisco. The wheat fields of Italy are different from those of Germany. Humidity, temperature, water sources, grain varieties, surrounding environments, and countless other subtle factors all contribute to the microbial community living inside a jar. Every starter is like a biological fingerprint, a living record of the place where it was born. If a scientist could read the entire microbial community inside a starter, they would discover a story about climate, about soil, about people, about seasons that have passed, about the hands that cared for it. This reminds me of one of Carl Jung's most important concepts, the process of individuation. Jung believed that every human being enters the world carrying the shared potential of humanity, yet no one becomes themselves by copying others. We truly mature only when we develop into a unique individual, a person marked by the distinct imprint of their own life. Sourdough is much the same. Every starter begins with the same basic ingredients. Yet over time, it gradually becomes itself. It absorbs its environment, adapts to circumstances, develops its own identity. No two jars tell the same story. No two microbial communities are entirely alike. And perhaps the same is true for us. Every human being carries the common elements of humanity. Yet every life creates a different symphony, a different collection of memories, a different soul, a story that can never be repeated. Perhaps this is why so many bakers feel a special bond with their starter, not merely because it helps create delicious bread, but because it seems to possess character, history, identity. Some starters develop rapidly, others grow more slowly. Some produce pronounced sour flavors, others remain gentle and subtle. Experienced bakers learn to listen to their starter, not with their ears, but through observation, through intuition, through experience accumulated over time. They watch the bubbles forming on the surface, notice the changing aromas, observe the speed of growth. Together, these things form a silent conversation between a human being and an invisible ecosystem. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." I have often felt that this statement could also apply to a baker and a starter, because over time, both are changed by the relationship. The baker learns patience, learns observation, learns respect for natural rhythms, and the starter continues to evolve under the baker's care. A relationship built not through words, but through time. And perhaps this is what makes sourdough such a beautiful symbol of life itself. We live in a world that constantly demands everything happen faster, more efficient, more immediate. But a starter does not understand the concept of hurry. It understands only time. It grows according to its own rhythm. It cannot be rushed, cannot be commanded, cannot be forced. You can only care for it, create the conditions it needs, and wait. This often makes me think that sourdough is a small lesson about life. Some things appear only when we are patient enough. Some things mature only when they are given time. Friendship, love, understanding, inner growth. All of them are like a starter. They cannot be completed in a day, cannot be purchased with money, cannot be forced through sheer willpower. They must be nurtured, little by little, day after day. And then, one day, they become something far greater than we ever imagined. Perhaps that is why a small jar of sourdough can move people so deeply. Because when we look at it, we see a miniature version of life itself, a fragile yet resilient ecosystem, a community built upon balance, a living organism carrying the memory of time, a story passed from one generation to the next. And when I think about that, I realize that sourdough is not only telling the story of bread, it is also telling the story of civilization, because humanity's ability to nurture, preserve, and pass knowledge across generations is what made the modern world possible. A starter passed down through decades is like a flame that never goes out. That flame passes from one pair of hands to another, from one kitchen to the next, from one generation to another, and in much the same way, human history is passed forward, not only through books, not only through monuments, but through the small practices of everyday life, recipes, stories, seeds, loaves of bread, and from these humble things, the first communities began to emerge. Granaries appeared, bakeries were built, villages grew larger, then became towns, then became cities, because in the end, bread is not merely food, it is the foundation of settlement, the foundation of community, the foundation of civilization. And that is the story we will explore in the next chapter, the story of how a loaf of bread helped build humanity's first cities. How bread helped build the first cities. When we left the sourdough starter in the previous chapter, where billions of invisible organisms were quietly creating the miracle of life, you may have noticed something. Small things can sometimes create enormous change. A single yeast cell cannot build a city. A single grain of wheat cannot create a civilization. A single loaf of bread cannot raise stone walls. But when millions of those small things become connected through time, history begins to change direction. And that is the story we will explore tonight. The story of how bread helped give rise to humanity's first cities. Today, when we look at modern cities with their towering buildings, broad roads, and endless streams of people, urban life feels natural, as though humanity has always lived this way. But in truth, for most of human history, cities did not exist. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small groups. They moved constantly, following herds of animals, following the seasons of fruits and plants, following sources of water. That life offered freedom, but it also carried uncertainty. No one knew whether the next hunt would succeed. No one knew how harsh the coming winter might be. No one knew whether there would be enough food tomorrow. And then something remarkable happened. Human beings began changing their relationship with nature. Instead of merely gathering what nature provided, they began cultivating. Instead of only hunting, they began nurturing. Instead of searching for food, they began producing food. It was one of the greatest revolutions in human history, and at the center of that revolution stood grain, wheat, barley, rye, tiny seeds, carrying the energy of life itself. When people learned to grow grain, something new emerged. They no longer needed to keep moving, because crops required time. A field cannot be carried upon one's shoulders. A harvest cannot migrate alongside a herd. To reap the harvest, people had to remain. To remain, they had to build homes, and from that, the first villages were born. Carl Jung believed that human development is closely tied to the creation of a center, a stable place from which the self can grow. In a sense, humanity's first villages reflected a similar journey. For the first time in history, people created a permanent center for their lives. No longer endless wandering, no longer constant movement, but settlement, attachment, belonging. Yet grain alone was not enough to create cities. Because wheat has a problem. It is an ingredient, not a meal. People needed a way to transform vast stores of grain into food that could be consumed every day. And that was the moment bread stepped onto the stage of history. If grain was the source of energy, then bread was the technology that unlocked it. It allowed people to transform a harvest into meals that could last for months, to transform seeds into nourishment, to transform stored grain into life. This may sound simple, but it was an enormous turning point. For the first time in history, human beings could accumulate food on a large scale. A hunter-gatherer society struggles to support thousands of people at once. A society built upon grain and bread can. From this point forward, a chain of changes began to spread. As grain supplies increased, places to store them became necessary. The first granaries appeared. At first they were simple structures, mud brick buildings, carefully lined storage pits, but over time they became larger, stronger, more important. And from this, power itself began to emerge, because anyone who controlled food possessed tremendous influence. Perhaps this is one of the oldest lessons in history. Those who control bread often control society. It is no coincidence that in many ancient civilizations, granaries stood near temples or administrative centers. Food was not merely nourishment. It was the foundation of power, the foundation of order, the foundation of stability. Yet the greatest transformation was still to come. As grain was stored, bread was produced, and communities expanded, people did not merely build granaries, they also built ovens. Today, we are accustomed to every family having its own kitchen. But in many ancient communities, the baking oven was a shared space, a place where people gathered, a place where they talked, a place where news was exchanged, a place where stories were told. Perhaps 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, on a morning in the plains of Mesopotamia, women carried dough to the village oven. Men discussed the harvest. Children ran through the sunlight. Elders shared memories from previous generations. And at the center of it all was bread, not merely as food, but as a reason for the community to gather. Viewed through a Jungian lens, this is an incredibly powerful image, because human beings need more than food. We need connection, shared rituals, shared symbols, a sense that we belong to something larger than ourselves. And interestingly enough, a warm loaf of bread often accomplishes this better than many speeches ever could. It draws people together. It creates sharing. It creates community. Perhaps that is why, in so many cultures, the act of breaking and sharing bread carries a meaning far deeper than eating itself. It symbolizes trust, friendship, connection. And from these countless small bonds, the first communities gradually grew. Villages expanded, populations increased, centers of food production became increasingly sophisticated, and on the horizon of history, something entirely new began to emerge. Humanity's first cities. But before walls were raised, before temples appeared, before kings ascended their thrones, another important story must be told, the story of how bread became the heart of community, and how humble bakeries quietly prepared the way for civilization itself. As the first communities flourished around grain fields and communal ovens, a profound transformation was unfolding within human history. It was not a conquest, not a battle, not a brilliant invention appearing in a single moment, but a slow process, almost invisible, like yeast quietly expanding dough, day by day, season by season. Generation by generation, small villages grew more crowded, granaries became larger, fields stretched farther across the landscape, and in a few special places around the world, something unprecedented appeared: the city. Uruk, in ancient Mesopotamia, is often regarded as one of humanity's first cities. Today, when we look upon its surviving ruins, our attention is naturally drawn toward temples, monuments, and ancient walls. But if we wish to understand what truly allowed Uruk to exist, we must look toward far humbler things: fields of wheat, stores of grain, baking ovens, Because a city cannot survive on ideas alone. A city requires food. Thousands of people living together cannot spend every day hunting and gathering. They require a stable source of energy, something that can be stored, distributed, managed, and bread became the answer. If grain was the fuel of civilization, bread was the form of energy civilization could consume every day. Perhaps this is one of the greatest wonders in history. The stones that built cities are remembered. The loaves that sustained them are often forgotten. Yet without those loaves, everything else would collapse. The builders of temples needed food. The diggers of canals needed food. The scribes needed food. The rulers needed food. Behind every great achievement of the ancient world stood a vast food system in constant motion. And at the center of that system stood bread. Carl Jung believed that the external structures of society often reflect the deeper needs within the human psyche. Viewed from that perspective, a city is not merely a collection of buildings. It is the physical expression of an ancient need. The need to live together, the need to cooperate, the need to create order amid nature's uncertainty. But order itself must be nourished, and food is the foundation of every form of order. As grain production increased, communities began facing a new question. Who would manage all this food? Who would decide how it should be distributed? Who would protect the stored supplies? From these questions, the first forms of organized administration slowly emerged. Granary managers, harvest record keepers, labor supervisors, tax collectors. It is fascinating to realize that many of history's earliest administrative systems were created not to manage war, but to manage food. The oldest clay tablets discovered in Mesopotamia do not tell stories of legendary heroes. They do not describe gods. Instead, they record quantities of grain, quantities of bread, quantities of livestock. This seems to reveal a simple yet profound truth. Civilization did not begin with grand dreams. It began with ensuring that people would have enough food tomorrow. Perhaps this is also what Jung meant when he wrote, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." Every spiritual achievement requires a material foundation. Every ideal requires a nourished body. Every civilization requires bread. As populations continued to grow, cities became more than places to live. They became centers of exchange. Grain from one region traveled to another. Bread was sold in markets. Professional bakers emerged as a specialized occupation. For the first time in history, not everyone needed to produce their own food. Some people could become craftsmen, some merchants, some scholars, some artists, because someone else was baking bread. It sounds simple, but this was the foundation of specialization. One of the most powerful engines of human civilization. Whenever I think about this, I find it deeply beautiful. Because every loaf nourishes more than a single person. It frees time. It allows someone to do something else, build something else, create something else. A loaf of bread may never write a poem, but it can nourish a poet. It may never build a temple, but it can nourish the builder. It may never record history, but it can nourish the historian. In this quiet way, bread participated in every achievement of civilization, not as the main character, but as the stage upon which all other characters could appear. And there is something more, something psychologically profound. Bakeries did not merely create food, they created community. The scent of fresh bread drifted through ancient streets. Conversations unfolded beside warm ovens. Stories were passed from one generation to the next. Children grew up surrounded by familiar aromas. According to Jung, human beings are connected not only through reason, but through shared symbols. And bread may be one of the oldest symbols of belonging. A community that shares bread often shares memories, shares beliefs, shares destinies. Perhaps that is why sharing bread carries a sacred meaning in so many cultures. It reminds us that we do not live alone. We exist within invisible networks of connection, like the yeast cells inside a sourdough starter, like the citizens of the first city, like humanity itself. And when we step back and look at this entire story, something extraordinary becomes visible. A grain leads to a field leads to a granary leads to a village leads to a city, and a city leads to civilization. It all begins with small things: earth, water, seeds, time, and a loaf of bread. Perhaps that is why the statement, "Without bread, there may have been no first cities," is not an exaggeration. It is a historical truth. But it is also a beautiful metaphor for life itself, that the greatest things are often built from the simplest things. And while the first cities continued growing beneath the sunlight of history, bakers quietly continued their familiar work, kneading, waiting, observing, adjusting. Because behind the rise of civilization lay another secret, the secret of baking itself, an art where science, time, and patience meet. And that is the story we will explore in the next chapter, the scientific secrets of baking, as we leave behind the first cities, where bread quietly nourished communities, villages, and eventually entire civilizations. A natural question arises: what makes bread become bread? What transforms a simple mixture of flour, water, and a little yeast into a food that has captivated the world for thousands of years? At first glance, baking appears remarkably simple. The baker mixes ingredients, kneads the dough, waits, then bakes. Yet the more closely we look, the more we realize that beneath this simplicity lies a world of astonishing complexity. A world where biology, chemistry, physics, and time work together. A world where invisible forces shape the final result. And perhaps that is what makes baking such a beautiful metaphor for life. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." Whenever I watch a baker at work, I am reminded of those words. At first, dough appears chaotic: dry flour, water, yeast, salt, all mixed together. No shape, no clear structure. Yet, little by little, a hidden order begins to emerge. And the first character in that story is gluten. Today, the word gluten often appears in discussions about nutrition. But in the world of baking, gluten is almost a miracle of nature. When water meets flour, two important groups of proteins awaken: gliadin and glutenin. At first, they exist separately, but through water and movement, they begin connecting. Tiny strands, tiny networks, gradually forming an invisible web. If you could peer deeply into the dough through a microscope, you would see something resembling an incredibly intricate mesh, soft, elastic, yet remarkably strong. Its purpose is to hold the gas bubbles created by yeast. Without gluten, the gas escapes. Without gluten, bread becomes dense, heavy, and hard. But when that network forms correctly, something wonderful begins to happen. The dough expands, becomes lighter, softer, filled with life. This always reminds me of the inner life of human beings. Each of us carries invisible energies, dreams, aspirations, hope, love. But energy creates something meaningful only when supported by structure. Just as gas needs gluten, the soul requires values, principles, and experiences to support its growth. Without structure, energy disperses. Without an inner framework, potential struggles to mature. And that is why bakers do more than simply mix dough. They knead it. If gluten is the thread, kneading is the weaving. Fold after fold, stretch after stretch. The rhythmic movement of human hands, proteins reorganize, connect, grow stronger, become more elastic. There is something deeply meditative about this work. The baker cannot rush, cannot force, cannot skip steps. They must feel, observe, listen to the dough through their hands. Many experienced bakers say they spend less time watching the clock and more time watching the dough, touching it, feeling it, because every day is different. Every season is different. Every flour is different. And this transforms baking into a dialogue with nature. Jung believed that psychological growth requires dialogue with the unconscious rather than total control over it. Baking is much the same. A skilled baker does not force the dough to obey. They cooperate with it, respect its natural laws, move alongside its rhythms. And then another character enters the story. Salt. It sounds surprising, only a small amount, yet its influence is enormous. Without salt, bread tastes bland. But flavor is not its most important role. Salt is also a coordinator, a keeper of order. It slows the activity of yeast, allowing fermentation to proceed more steadily. At the same time, it strengthens the gluten network. In other words, salt creates balance. Whenever I think about this, I am reminded of limits in life. Many of us see limits as negative, as obstacles to freedom. Yet countless things can flourish only because of appropriate boundaries. A river needs its banks. A garden needs its fence. A melody needs its rhythm. And bread needs salt. If yeast works too quickly, structure becomes unstable. Without regulation, chaos emerges. Perhaps this is also a lesson about life. Growth does not always come from acceleration. Sometimes maturity means slowing down, finding balance, respecting the right rhythm. And alongside flour, yeast, and salt, there is another ingredient many people rarely notice: water. Not merely the amount of water, but its temperature. A difference of only a few degrees can change the entire process. Warmer water encourages faster fermentation. Cooler water slows everything down. The baker understands that they are not merely mixing ingredients, they are adjusting time itself, adjusting pace, adjusting the future of the dough. And here we begin to approach the greatest secret of baking, an ingredient that cannot be seen, cannot be held, cannot be purchased in a store, yet is more important than all the others: time. Because ultimately, baking is not the art of controlling dough, not the art of controlling yeast, but the art of working with time. And that is the story we will continue exploring in the next chapter, where time, fermentation, and patience become the true artists behind every remarkable loaf of bread. If we had to choose the most important ingredient in bread, many people would probably say flour. Others might choose yeast. Some would say water. But experienced bakers often know that there is another ingredient more important than all the rest, one that cannot be seen, cannot be measured, cannot be purchased: time. Perhaps that sounds strange, because in modern life, we often view time as something to save, something to shorten, something to optimize. But in the world of bread, time is not an obstacle. It is an ingredient, a living ingredient, an invisible collaborator, a silent artisan working inside the dough. When the baker finishes kneading, the most important part of the process is actually just beginning: waiting. It sounds simple, but it is the hardest part, because human beings naturally want to intervene, to push, to see results immediately. Meanwhile, nature follows its own rhythm. Yeast needs time to consume sugars. Bacteria need time to grow. Gluten needs time to relax and reorganize. Flavor needs time to develop. Nothing can be forced. Carl Jung once wrote, "Nature must not win the game, but she cannot lose." It is a profound statement about psychology, but it applies perfectly to baking as well. The baker can guide the process, create conditions, make adjustments, but ultimately, they must respect the laws of nature. No one can command yeast to grow twice as fast. No one can force time to move more quickly. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of bread, the aroma that makes the whole world hungry. As we concluded the previous chapter, the loaf of bread had finally emerged from the oven. After many hours of fermentation, after patience, after millions of invisible reactions unfolding in the darkness, it appeared with a warm, golden brown crust, carrying a beauty that human beings have cherished for thousands of years. Yet what is fascinating is that before we see the loaf, before we touch it, and even before we taste it, something arrives first. Its aroma, a gentle fragrance, drifts through the room, winding its way through the air, quietly reaching the brain, and almost immediately, something inside us awakens. A feeling of hunger, a feeling of anticipation, a feeling of comfort, and sometimes even memories that seem to have been asleep for years. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. A winter morning, a warm kitchen, a small bakery on a street corner, or simply the scent of freshly baked bread carried through the air. And suddenly, something feels deeply familiar, not because you are consciously thinking about it, but because a deeper part of your mind recognized it first. Carl Jung spent much of his life exploring the deeper layers of the human soul, the parts that exist beneath consciousness, memories, emotions, archetypal images that we do not always recognize through reason alone. Whenever I think about the smell of bread, it feels like a small key opening a doorway into that world, because among all human senses, the sense of smell occupies a special place. Sound must be interpreted, images must be recognized, language must be understood, but scent often travels directly into emotion, directly into memory, directly into the most ancient regions of the brain. That is why a single smell can sometimes revive an entire childhood, a home that no longer exists, a loved one who is no longer present, a distant summer, a moment that seemed erased by time, all through a single breath. And among all the aromas humanity has ever known, the scent of freshly baked bread may be one of the most powerful, not merely because it is pleasant, but because it has accompanied humanity for so long. For thousands of years, the smell of bread meant safety. It meant food. It meant survival. It meant the feeling that tomorrow still held hope. Perhaps our distant ancestors learned this long before modern language ever existed. When a community smelled bread baking, it meant grain had been harvested. The granaries were still full. No one would go hungry today. That aroma became a biological signal, a message sent to the brain, a quiet whisper saying, "You are safe." And what is remarkable is that thousands of years later, our brains still respond in much the same way. Today, science helps us understand what is happening. A freshly baked loaf does not produce a single aroma. It produces hundreds of aromatic compounds. Some carry gentle sweetness. Some resemble caramel. Some evoke roasted nuts. Some hint at honey. Some suggest butter and cream. Together they blend into an invisible symphony, a piece of music played with molecules rather than sound. What has always amazed me is how quickly the brain recognizes this harmony, without thought, without analysis, without reasoning, simply by breathing. Jung believed that certain layers of human response are far older than conscious awareness. Responses shaped across countless generations. Perhaps our love for the smell of bread is part of that inheritance, a biological memory preserved within the body itself, a fragment of human history still alive within each of us. And there is something even more fascinating. Aroma does not merely awaken memory, it creates emotion. You can step into a room and immediately feel comfort, feel peace, feel welcomed, feel as though you have come home. Sometimes not because of what you see, but because of what you smell. Bread often creates exactly that feeling: warmth, familiarity, closeness, emotions that are difficult to describe with words. Perhaps this is why bakeries occupy such a special place in many cultures. They are not merely places that sell food. They are places that create a sense of community, places where people meet, places where mornings begin, places where ordinary human stories quietly unfold. Yet if we look deeper, we discover that this remarkable aroma does not appear by accident. It is the result of one of the most beautiful chemical miracles in nature, a reaction that transformed not only bread, but nearly the entire history of human cuisine. The Maillard reaction, a process in which heat, sugars, and proteins come together to create color, aroma, and depth of flavor. A meeting between fire and matter, a moment of transformation, a form of modern alchemy that we will explore in the next chapter. If there is any moment when science and magic seem to become one, it is probably when bread enters the oven. In the previous section, we spoke about how the aroma of bread can awaken humanity's deepest memories, how it can return us to childhood, how it can make an unfamiliar room suddenly feel like home, how it can create a sense of peace that language itself sometimes struggles to express. But what truly creates that aroma? What gives a warm loaf such power over human emotion? The answer lies within a process scientists call the Maillard reaction. It sounds like the name of a complicated chemical formula, yet in reality, it is one of the most familiar phenomena in everyday life. Whenever bread turns golden in the oven, whenever the crust changes from pale to deep amber brown, whenever the kitchen begins filling with fragrance, the Maillard reaction is taking place. It is the meeting of sugars and proteins under high heat, a meeting that creates hundreds of new compounds carrying aromas of caramel, roasted nuts, butter, honey, warm wood, the scent of abundance, the scent of memory. What is remarkable is that long before humanity understood chemistry, people already loved the results of this reaction. Ancient Egyptians knew nothing about molecules. Romans knew nothing about enzymes. Medieval bakers knew nothing about the Maillard reaction. Yet all of them understood that a golden brown loaf was more appealing than a pale one. It is almost as though the human body understood the answer long before science discovered it. Carl Jung believed that beneath consciousness exist forms of understanding that do not arise entirely from reason. Older forms of knowing, more primitive forms of awareness. Wisdom shaped over countless generations. Perhaps our love for the smell of bread belongs to that ancient wisdom, for throughout most of human history, the smell of baking bread meant energy. It meant safe food. It meant survival. The brain learned to respond positively to that signal, and even today, that response remains. When a fresh loaf emerges from the oven, what follows is more than hunger. An entire network of emotions begins to awaken. You may feel more relaxed, more comfortable, safer, perhaps even happier. That may sound overly romantic for a loaf of bread, yet the human brain has always worked this way. We do not react only to the present. We react to associations, to memories, to experiences accumulated long ago. A child raised in a home filled with the smell of bread may carry that feeling throughout life. Years later, a fleeting familiar scent can instantly return them to winter mornings with family, laughter, conversation, ordinary moments that become irreplaceable. Jung called this the power of symbols. An ordinary object can carry meanings far beyond itself. Bread is not merely food. It becomes a symbol of home, of care, of love, of community. Perhaps that is why sharing bread carries such significance in so many cultures. From the warm naan of South Asia, to the pita breads of the Middle East, to sourdough loaves across Europe, to tortillas throughout Central America. Different shapes, different ingredients, different languages, yet remarkably similar emotions. A sense of belonging, a sense of connection, a sense that one is not alone. And perhaps that is what makes the smell of bread so powerful. It does not merely awaken the hunger of the body. It awakens memories of community, memories of family, memories of the places we call home. In Jungian psychology, there is a concept known as the collective unconscious. Jung believed that beneath cultural differences, humanity shares common images and experiences, archetypes that appear again and again across civilizations. The mother, the hero, the home, the fire, the shared meal. And when we think carefully, bread seems to touch many of these archetypes. It is born from earth, from seeds, from labor, from fire, from time, from patience, from community. It is the embodiment of transformation, a journey from a tiny seed to something capable of nourishing an entire civilization. Perhaps that is why the smell of bread often feels deeper than we realize, not only because of aromatic molecules, not only because of chemical reactions, but because it reaches the oldest layers of human memory, layers that existed long before we were born, layers that Jung believed still live within each of us. And as the loaf cools upon the wooden rack, tiny sounds begin to emerge, soft crackling noises from the crust as it contracts, as though the bread is telling its final story. A story of earth, of wheat, of yeast, of fire, of time, and of humanity. Yet what is fascinating is that although all bread is created from the same fundamental principles, the world has produced hundreds, even thousands, of different versions. Each region has its own recipe. Each culture tells its own story through flour and fire. And that is the next journey awaiting us. A voyage through some of the most famous breads in the world, where each loaf offers a different answer to the same ancient question. How do we transform a tiny grain into something extraordinary? That is the story of our next chapter, famous breads from around the world. As the loaf cooled upon the wooden rack in the previous chapter, carrying an aroma capable of awakening humanity's deepest memories, we began to notice something fascinating. Bread exists almost everywhere on Earth, from small villages hidden within deserts, to ancient cities along the Mediterranean, to the cold mountains of Europe, to the tropical forests of Central America. People everywhere discovered ways to transform grain into food. Yet the miracle is that they did not all do it in the same way. Just as every culture tells different stories about life, each people tells its own story through bread. Viewed through Jung's perspective, this is an extraordinary phenomenon. Jung believed humanity shares deep common needs, yet each culture expresses those needs through unique forms. Just as different dreams can reflect the same underlying longing, bread is much the same. Behind hundreds of different shapes lies the same ancient question. How do we transform tiny grains into something capable of sustaining life? And tonight, we will travel through different lands to listen to the answers humanity has created. Let us begin in Italy, a land where food is often treated as an art form. Among Italy's famous breads, ciabatta occupies a particularly interesting place. What surprises many people is that it is not ancient at all. In fact, ciabatta appeared only in the late 20th century. Compared with the thousands of years of bread history, it is practically a newborn. Yet that is precisely what makes its story fascinating. Ciabatta was created in response to a changing modern world. It possesses a crisp crust, an interior filled with large air pockets, a light and open texture, as though the baker were trying to preserve the freedom of air itself within the loaf. Each slice of ciabatta resembles a small map of fermentation. The open spaces inside tell the story of yeast, water, and time. Leaving Italy behind, we travel eastward, to lands where fire has long held a sacred place in human life. Across India, Pakistan, and much of Central Asia, one bread has accompanied families through countless generations. Naan. If ciabatta tells a story of openness, naan tells a story of fire. It is baked inside a tandoor, a cylindrical oven capable of reaching extraordinary temperatures. The baker presses the dough directly against the scorching walls. Within minutes, the miracle appears. The bread swells, golden brown spots emerge, fragrance fills the air. There is something deeply primal about this process. It reminds us of the earliest days when our ancestors discovered the power of fire. Fire did not merely help humanity survive. Fire helped create civilization. And naan remains one of the oldest living memories of the relationship between human beings and flame. Continuing our journey, we arrive in the Middle East, home to another bread that has become a regional symbol, pita. At first glance, pita seems simple, yet hidden within it is a beautiful lesson in physics. When the dough enters a hot oven, moisture inside rapidly expands. Pressure rises. The bread inflates like a small balloon, and when it cools, it leaves behind an empty pocket, a natural pouch. That is why pita can be opened and filled with food. What always fascinates me is how invisible physical laws can create culinary traditions lasting thousands of years. A simple phenomenon of steam became part of cultural identity. Perhaps life works much the same way. Small and ordinary forces often create effects far deeper than we realize. And then we cross the ocean, arriving in Central America, where the tortilla became a foundation of daily life. If wheat bread was the soul of many old world civilizations, tortilla played a similar role throughout the Americas. Made from corn rather than wheat, tortilla reminds us that humanity has never followed only one path. The Maya and Aztec civilizations built their worlds around an entirely different crop, yet the outcome was remarkably similar. A simple bread, easy to carry, easy to preserve, easy to share, a perfect tool for feeding communities. Jung believed that the most important symbols often emerge independently in different cultures, not because people copy one another, but because they confront the same human needs. Tortilla is a beautiful example of that idea. Different ingredients, different language, different history, yet the same timeless story of transforming seeds into life. And as we look back upon these breads, we begin to realize that bread reflects more than science. It reflects geography, climate, history, religion, and the soul of the communities that created it. Yet our journey is far from over. Ahead lie breads with even stranger techniques. Bagels that are boiled before baking, pretzels dipped into alkaline solutions, the miraculous buttery layers of croissant, the rich indulgence of brioche. Those stories await us in the next chapter, The Art of the Baker. After traveling together through the world's most famous breads, from the warm naan of South Asia to the delicate layered croissants of Europe, we begin to notice something. Behind every remarkable loaf stands a human being quietly at work. Someone who often wakes while most of the world is still asleep. Someone who spends hours observing tiny changes that many people would never notice. Someone who is part artist and part scientist. That person is the baker. At first glance, the work seems simple. Flour, water, salt, yeast, mix, wait, bake. But the deeper we look, the more we realize that bread making is not merely about following a recipe. It is about learning to listen, listening to the weather, listening to the dough, listening to time, and above all, listening to the subtle signals that nature quietly sends. Carl Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Whenever I watch a skilled baker at work, I am reminded of those words, because their craft is built upon countless tiny details. Details that an outsider might easily overlook. Consider the seeds scattered across the surface of a loaf. Today, we often think of sesame seeds, flax seeds, or sunflower seeds as decoration, something that simply makes bread look more beautiful, more appealing. But in reality, they carry far more meaning than that. They add texture, they add flavor, they add contrast. Each seed tells a small additional story about the loaf. Much like the seemingly insignificant moments in life, a brief conversation, a smile, an ordinary afternoon. Only later do we realize that these small moments created the depth of our memories. The baker understands this. They know that beauty is often created through small details. And then there is one act that almost everyone who has ever baked bread knows well: scoring the loaf. Before the bread enters the oven, the baker takes a sharp blade and creates cuts across the surface. At first glance, it appears decorative, but in truth, it is science. As the loaf bakes, the gases inside continue to expand. Without a proper outlet, the bread will crack unpredictably, losing control, losing form. The score allows the baker to decide where the loaf will open, where the energy will be released. This always makes me think of human life. We often try to keep everything perfectly contained, holding every pressure inside, holding every emotion inside. Yet, like a loaf in the oven, energy always needs a path through which it can escape. Jung spent his life studying what happens when people suppress too much. He believed that what is buried does not disappear. It simply finds another way to emerge. Perhaps that is why the score upon a loaf becomes such a beautiful image. A reminder that healthy growth is not about preventing all pressure, but about creating a proper place for that pressure to be released. Yet perhaps the baker's most astonishing skill resides in their hands. A beginner baker constantly watches the clock, constantly checks the recipe, constantly monitors every step. Experienced bakers often do the opposite. They touch the dough, they feel, they listen with their fingertips. Too dry or too wet, too tight or too soft, too young or ready at last. All of these things are understood through touch. This is something no book can fully teach, because it belongs to experience, to intuition, to thousands of hours spent observing and practicing. Jung believed intuition to be one of the most important functions of the human psyche. Not superstition, not magic, but the ability to recognize patterns before consciousness has found words for them. Great bakers often possess exactly this form of intuition. They do not merely see the dough, they sense its future. They know whether it is moving in the right direction. And then there is a famous test known throughout the baking world, the window pane test. The baker stretches a small piece of dough as gently as possible. If it can be pulled into a thin membrane that becomes almost translucent without immediately tearing, it indicates that the gluten network has developed properly. It sounds highly technical, yet every time I see this test performed, I find something deeply beautiful within it. Because it demonstrates that strength does not always reside in rigidity. Sometimes strength resides in flexibility, in adaptability, in the ability to withstand pressure without breaking. Perhaps people are much the same. The strongest individuals are not always the hardest. Often they are those who can bend with the wind while remaining true to themselves, like a well-developed dough, soft but not weak, flexible but not falling apart. And then, after all those tests, an extraordinarily important stage begins. The stage many bakers call proofing, the final period before baking. The moment when the baker must answer a difficult question: is it ready yet? And this is where science gradually gives way to art, where the clock becomes less important than observation, where experience begins to speak, where the baker must learn to trust their own perception. Perhaps one of the most difficult moments in baking is not mixing, not shaping, not baking, but deciding upon timing. The moment when the baker asks, "Is it time to place the loaf into the oven?" This stage is known as proofing, the final period during which the dough continues developing before meeting intense heat. At first glance, it seems simple, just wait long enough. But reality is far more subtle. Bake too soon, and the loaf has not reached its full potential. Wait too long, and the structure begins to weaken. Gas starts to escape. The dough loses its vitality. The remarkable thing is that no clock in the world can provide a perfect answer for every situation, because every day is different. Every kitchen is different. Every season is different. The baker must learn to observe, learn to feel, learn to trust very small signals. A faint indentation left by a fingertip, a movement almost impossible to see, a delicate tension across the surface. These things cannot be learned from books alone. They are accumulated through time, through mistakes, through failures, through hundreds and thousands of loaves. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." A skilled baker works in much the same way. They do not merely look at the recipe, they look into their own experience, into what their hands have learned, into the silent understanding accumulated across the years. Perhaps this is the point where baking becomes art, because art always emerges where knowledge meets intuition, where technique meets feeling, where science meets the soul. And then, even after the baker understands dough, yeast, and time, nature still has surprises waiting. A rainy day can change the loaf. A dry day can change the loaf. A kitchen high in the mountains can produce a completely different result from one beside the sea. Humidity is one example. Flour behaves almost like a living organism. It continuously exchanges moisture with the surrounding environment. On humid days, flour absorbs more water, becoming softer, more supple. On dry days, the exact same recipe creates an entirely different dough, drier, stiffer, more difficult to handle. This means that recipes are never absolute. The baker must adjust, must adapt, must enter into dialogue with reality itself. And this is one reason baking has always felt deeply philosophical to me, because life works the same way. No 2 days are identical. No 2 circumstances are identical. What worked yesterday may no longer work today. Maturity is not found in clinging to unchanging rules. It is found in the ability to adapt while remaining true to one's essence. Like the baker, changing the water, changing the timing, changing the method, yet never changing the ultimate goal, to create a beautiful loaf of bread. Besides humidity, there is another factor many people rarely consider: altitude. At higher elevations, the air becomes thinner, atmospheric pressure becomes lower, water boils at lower temperatures, gas expands differently within the dough. The entire baking process changes. A perfect recipe at sea level may fail entirely in the mountains. This reminds us of a simple truth: there is no single formula for everyone. What works for one person may not work for another. What succeeds in one circumstance may fail in another. Jung devoted much of his life to challenging the idea that human beings could be reduced to rigid formulas. He believed each individual represents a unique journey, a unique path, a unique unfolding. Bakers understand this in their own way, not through philosophy, but through flour, through yeast, through weather, through the living experience of each day. And then, after all those observations, the baker places the loaf into the oven. The decisive moment. No more corrections, no more interventions, no more changes. Everything has been prepared. Every choice has been made. Now the heat will complete the remaining work. There has always been something deeply lifelike about that moment. There are times when we must learn, prepare, work, adjust, but eventually there also comes a time to let go, to trust the process, to trust what we have planted, to trust that time will do its part. A baker cannot pull a loaf from the oven after 5 minutes and demand perfection. Just as we cannot force ourselves to mature overnight, some things appear only when time completes its work. Perhaps that is why baking often feels so close to meditation. It teaches patience, humility, attention, presence, qualities that grow increasingly precious in a hurried modern world. Jung believed that true growth is not a journey of conquering the outer world. It is a journey of building a harmonious relationship with the inner world. In a way, bakers are undertaking that journey every day. With every loaf, every failure, every success, they learn to observe, learn to listen, learn to cooperate with forces greater than themselves. And perhaps that is why truly wonderful bread always feels special. Not only because of its ingredients, not only because of technique, but because it contains human presence, time, attention, patience, and love for this ancient craft. When we look at a perfect loaf, we usually see only the final result, but the baker sees the entire journey, the thousands of small decisions, the moments of waiting, the lessons the loaf has taught. And as evening slowly settles in, while the scent of bread lingers somewhere within our imagination, a larger question begins to emerge. If bread can shape an individual life so deeply, can it also shape the history of the world? The answer is yes. For thousands of years, bread did not merely feed families. It fed armies, fed cities, fed the mightiest empires ever built upon the earth. And that is the story we will explore in the next chapter. Bread, and the rise of empires. As we concluded the previous chapter, the baker was still standing beside the oven, quietly watching the loaf expand beneath the warmth of the fire. It was a small scene, an ordinary one, even a private one. Yet remarkably, those ordinary loaves helped change the course of world history. For bread is not merely the story of kitchens, not merely the story of families, not merely the story of bakers. For thousands of years, bread has also been the story of kings, empires, wars, rebellions, and some of the most powerful civilizations humanity has ever created. When we think of world history, we often remember battles, emperors, monuments, conquests. Yet sometimes history is determined by things far simpler: a river, a harvest, a granary, a loaf of bread. Perhaps nowhere illustrates this more clearly than ancient Egypt. Imagine a morning more than 4,000 years ago. The sun rises over the Nile. The floodwaters have recently receded, leaving behind fertile soil. Fields of wheat stretch beneath golden light. And while pyramids slowly rise upon the horizon, another task unfolds quietly alongside them: baking bread. Bread in religion, culture, and ritual. When we concluded the previous chapter, loaves of bread had already traveled through thousands of years of history, alongside great empires. They fed the workers who built the pyramids along the Nile. They marched with Roman legions across stone roads stretching throughout Europe. They appeared in medieval marketplaces, where the price of a single loaf could sometimes determine the peace of an entire city. But if we view bread only as a source of food, we have perhaps understood only half of its story. For throughout human history, bread has nourished more than the body. It has also nourished something far less visible, something that cannot be weighed on a scale or measured in calories: the human soul. Perhaps this is one of the most remarkable things about bread. Few foods have been given so many symbolic meanings. Few foods have appeared in so many sacred ceremonies, and few things so simple have connected human beings so deeply. If tonight we were to step into an ancient temple, a synagogue, a church, or a harvest festival anywhere in the world, there is a very good chance that we would find bread there. Not by accident, but because, from very early on, humanity saw something in bread that extended far beyond nutrition. Carl Gustav Jung believed that beneath cultural differences exist shared symbols that humanity has recreated for thousands of years. He called them archetypes, images carrying profound meaning for the human psyche. Among them is a particularly important archetype, the archetype of nourishment, of the mother, of food, of life itself. Perhaps this is why bread gradually became a sacred symbol. It is created from earth, from seed, from water, from time, from labor, and finally, from fire. It is the embodiment of transformation, a small miracle that human beings can witness every day, from an inert grain of wheat to a warm, fragrant loaf, from potential to reality, from seed to life. That is why, in so many religions, bread is not merely food. It becomes a symbol of grace, of blessing, of the connection between humanity and the sacred. Even if we do not view bread through a religious lens, it is difficult to deny that there is something extraordinary about sharing bread with another person. Imagine a weary traveler arriving at the door of a home hundreds of years ago. No telephone, no hotels, no maps, no guarantee of safety. And then, the host invites that traveler inside, places a freshly baked loaf upon the table, a little water, perhaps a bowl of warm soup. That moment is not simply about eating, it is a declaration. You are welcome here. You are no longer alone. You are safe. In many cultures, sharing bread is nearly synonymous with sharing trust. When two people break a loaf together, they are not merely sharing food, they are sharing presence, trust, and sometimes even fate. Jung observed that human beings cannot truly live alone. We need community, we need connection, we need a sense of belonging, and perhaps bread became one of the simplest symbols of that need. For throughout history, countless relationships began around a table. Countless reconciliations occurred beside a loaf of bread. Countless friendships were built through shared meals. There is something fascinating about the fact that nearly every culture developed rituals surrounding the sharing of food. Yet bread often occupies the center of those rituals. Not because it is expensive, but because it is common. Not because it is luxurious, but because it is familiar. It is something almost everyone understands, needs, and it is precisely this simplicity that makes it a perfect symbol of community. For the things that bind human beings most deeply are rarely the rarest things. They are the things that are shared, like sunlight, like water, like stories, and like bread. This becomes even more apparent when we look at the important milestones of human life, from birth to adulthood, to marriage, to death. Bread appears somewhere along the journey, a quiet witness, a thread connecting generations. But perhaps the most fascinating part still lies ahead. For when we look deeper, we discover that human beings did not merely eat bread. They shaped it into meaningful symbols: the sun, animals, knots, ancient spirals, as though within each loaf they were embedding their deepest stories about the world and themselves. If we look back across the entire human journey, we realize that bread rarely appears only in ordinary moments. It often appears during the most meaningful ones. Moments when people feel they are crossing an invisible threshold, from one stage of life into another, from the past into the future, from loneliness into connection, from loss into hope. Perhaps that is why bread appears in so many rituals throughout the world. In traditional weddings across many parts of Europe, bread is often placed in a position of honor, not merely as food, but as a blessing, a wish for abundance, for a warm home, for fruitful harvests, for a life filled with enough. When a newly married couple breaks a loaf together, the act carries a meaning far deeper than sharing a meal. It is a promise to share life, to face hardship together, to keep the family hearth burning. Jung believed that marriage is not merely the union of two people. It is the meeting of two inner worlds, two stories, two histories, two streams of memory. And it is fascinating that in so many places, bread became the perfect symbol of this union, for it too is the result of harmony, between earth and water, between yeast and flour, between time and fire, between nature and human hands. Yet if bread appears in new beginnings, it also appears in farewells. In many cultures, bread is placed upon the table during funerals. At first glance, this may seem surprising. Why would a food associated with life appear in moments of loss? Perhaps because humanity has always understood that life and death are not entirely separate. A grain of wheat must be buried before it can grow. A harvest must end before another can begin. A loaf must undergo transformation before it becomes nourishment. In Jungian symbolism, many images of life simultaneously contain images of transformation. Death is not merely an ending. It is also a change of form, a journey into a new state of being. And bread, with its remarkable transformation from seed to sustenance, naturally became a symbol of that cycle. Perhaps that is why in the most sorrowful moments, people still share bread together, as a reminder that community remains, that life continues, that memory endures. But perhaps nowhere does bread express the connection between humanity and nature more clearly than in harvest festivals. For thousands of years, harvest season has been a special time, the moment when people witness the results of patience, the results of labor, the results of hope planted months before. In many places, special loaves are baked exclusively for these celebrations, not for everyday meals, but to honor the gift of the earth, to honor life, to honor the endless cycles of nature. And it is here that we begin entering a truly fascinating world, the world of symbolic shapes. For people did not simply bake bread, they sculpted it. In some regions, loaves were shaped like the sun, large circles, with rays extending outward. The sun has long been one of humanity's oldest symbols. Source of light, source of warmth, source of life. Without the sun, there would be no harvest. Without harvest, there would be no bread. By shaping bread like the sun, people were unconsciously retelling the story of life's origins. Elsewhere, bread was shaped into animals, birds, sheep, horses, deer, each carrying its own meaning: strength, fertility, protection, good fortune. In Jungian psychology, animals often represent the deepest instinctual layers of the soul, the parts older than reason, the parts that connect us to nature. When people shaped bread into animals, they were not merely decorating food, they were expressing their bond with the natural world, a bond that existed long before writing, before cities, before recorded history. And then there were loaves shaped into knots, twists, braids. At first glance, they seem simple, yet in many cultures, knots symbolize connection, continuity, things without a true beginning or end. Jung was especially fascinated by circular symbols and repeating patterns. He saw them as images of wholeness, of integration, of the human journey toward becoming oneself. When we look at a braided loaf, we may see more than food. We see a symbol of connection between generations, between past and present, between individuals and community. Perhaps that is what makes bread so extraordinary. It exists at the boundary between the material and the spiritual. On one hand, it is practical, ordinary, familiar. On the other hand, it carries layers of meaning that humanity has attached to it for thousands of years. It nourishes the body, yet it also nourishes stories, traditions, collective memories, beliefs, the feeling of belonging. Jung believed that human beings cannot live by reason alone. We need symbols, we need rituals, we need actions that help life feel meaningful. Bread has fulfilled that role quietly across countless generations, not through speeches, not through monuments, but through shared meals, through hands breaking a loaf together, through small rituals filled with meaning. And perhaps that is the most beautiful message of this chapter. That bread does not merely nourish the body, it nourishes community, memory, belonging, and the most deeply human part of ourselves. But when something becomes that important, people also learn to cherish it, learn not to waste it. For many centuries, throwing away bread would have been almost unthinkable, because every loaf contained time, labor, harvests, and life itself. And so, in our next chapter, we will explore one of humanity's oldest traditions: how to never waste a loaf of bread. Never waste a loaf of bread. When we concluded the previous chapter, loaves of bread were still present on wedding tables, at harvest festivals, and within humanity's sacred rituals. They were not merely food, they were symbols, memories, communities, connections between generations. And perhaps because they carried so much meaning, bread was rarely wasted throughout most of human history. Today, in many parts of the world, throwing away a few stale slices may seem ordinary, but if we traveled back only a few centuries, such an idea would have been nearly unimaginable. For most of our ancestors, every loaf represented a long journey, a journey that began with a seed, with soil, with rain, with sunlight, with months of labor in the fields, with harvest days, with hours spent grinding grain into flour, with kneading, fermentation, baking, and only then arriving at the table. A loaf was never merely food. It was time transformed into matter. Perhaps that is why many cultures viewed dropping bread onto the ground as a regrettable act. In some places, people would pick it up and gently kiss it as a sign of respect, not out of superstition, but because they understood the value of what they held in their hands. Carl Jung observed that symbols endure because they emerge from humanity's most fundamental experiences, and food is certainly one of those experiences. For hundreds of thousands of years, having enough to eat often determined survival itself. And so respect for food is not merely a cultural habit, It is also an ancient memory, preserved within the collective psyche, a memory of harsh winters, failed harvests, times of scarcity, moments when even a small piece of bread carried enormous value. Perhaps that is why when bread began to grow stale, people did not see something to throw away. They saw an ingredient waiting to be transformed, a second life waiting to begin. How bread changed the modern world. When we ended the previous chapter, stale loaves of bread were still teaching us a simple lesson about transformation. Nothing truly ends. Only new forms begin to emerge. And perhaps the same is true of bread itself. For when humanity entered the modern age, bread did not disappear. It was not replaced by machines. It was not left behind by technology. On the contrary, it continued to change, continued to adapt, continued to accompany humanity into a world that was moving faster than ever before. If ancient farmers carried bread with them along dusty roads, modern people were searching for something remarkably similar, a meal that was simple, convenient, portable, a food that could go anywhere. And it is fascinating that one of the greatest revolutions in modern food began with an extraordinarily simple idea: the sandwich. Today, sandwiches are so common that we barely notice them. They appear in cafes, on trains, in schools, at offices, on long journeys, even on flights crossing entire continents. But if we look more closely, the sandwich was truly a revolutionary invention. For the first time in history, bread was no longer merely a meal eaten at a table. It became a meal that could travel, a meal that could accompany people wherever they went, a meal perfectly suited to the increasingly rapid pace of modern society. 2 slices of bread, a filling in between. At first glance, it seems like a very simple idea, but sometimes the ideas that change the world are exactly that simple. We often imagine revolutions arriving through giant machines, complex inventions, advanced technologies. Yet sometimes a revolution is simply discovering a better way to eat lunch. Carl Jung believed that cultural evolution reflects deep needs within the collective psyche. As life changes, symbols and habits change alongside it. The sandwich is a perfect example. It reflects society's movement from a fixed way of life toward a more mobile one. From meals that lasted for hours to meals designed for the rhythm of modern work. Yet what is remarkable is that despite the changing form, the essence remained unchanged. At the center of every sandwich was still bread, still wheat, still the ancient story of soil, yeast, and time. Technology changed. Society changed. But some things remained. A few decades later, another transformation appeared. At first glance, it seemed even simpler than the sandwich itself: sliced bread. Today, it is difficult to imagine that there was once a time when this was considered a groundbreaking innovation. But when sliced bread appeared in the early 20th century, it completely transformed the way people used bread. Before that, every household had to cut its own loaf. Slices varied in thickness. The process took time. The results were inconsistent. Sliced bread made everything easier, faster, more convenient, more uniform. It may sound like a small thing, but small changes often shape the habits of millions. Sometimes history changes not through great explosions, but through quiet innovations. A button, a pen, a wheel, or a loaf that has already been sliced. Interestingly, it was here that bread became closely associated with a new idea: convenience. Modern people increasingly lacked time. Life moved faster, distances grew greater, work became more demanding, and bread became the perfect companion. It required little preparation, no elaborate ritual, no special conditions. It was always ready, always familiar, always present. Perhaps this is one reason bread has endured for so long. It knows how to adapt without losing itself. It changes form, yet preserves its soul. Much like human beings during the journey of growth, Jung often emphasized that healthy development does not mean abandoning the past. It means carrying the past into the future in a new form. Modern bread is doing exactly that, carrying thousands of years of history while remaining alive in today's world. And then, as the Industrial Revolution spread across the globe, an even larger transformation began. Not only did the way people ate bread change, the way bread was made changed as well. Small bakeries were increasingly supplemented by large-scale production lines. Machines entered the kneading process. Production increased. Costs decreased. Bread became more accessible than ever before. For many working families, this was a historic shift. For the first time, a food that had once required immense labor could be produced on a massive scale and sold at lower prices. Bread was no longer simply the food of local communities. It became the food of modern society itself. Yet alongside this transformation, a new question emerged. As technology intervened more deeply in the baking process, what would happen to humanity's ancient relationship with bread? As the Industrial Revolution continued to shape the world, factories grew larger, cities became more crowded, and the pace of life accelerated in ways never before seen in history. In this environment, bread faced a new challenge. How could it feed millions of people every day? How could it be produced quickly enough, consistently enough, affordably enough? And from these questions, a quiet new character stepped onto the stage of history: commercial yeast. For thousands of years, bakers had relied upon natural fermentation or starter cultures, passed from one batch to the next. Now they possessed something entirely different: a deliberately cultivated yeast, standardized, mass-produced, and most importantly, predictable. For many bakers, this was a revolution, because baking had always been a dialogue with uncertainty. Weather changed, temperature changed, humidity changed, natural cultures changed, but commercial yeast offered a new promise: consistency. A loaf baked today could resemble a loaf baked tomorrow. A bakery in one city could produce nearly the same results as a bakery hundreds of miles away. Today, that may sound ordinary, but at the time, it was a tremendous leap forward. Human beings have always sought a balance between nature and control, between surprise and predictability, between chaos and order. Carl Jung observed that one of the deepest needs of the human psyche is to create order from a constantly changing world. In a sense, commercial yeast became an expression of that desire. It allowed people to exercise greater control over a process that had long been organic and unpredictable. Yet history was not finished. In the middle of the 20th century, an even larger change appeared, one that most consumers have never heard of, yet one that affected billions of loaves around the world: the Chorleywood process. Developed in Britain in 1961, this method fundamentally changed industrial bread production. For thousands of years, time had been one of bread's most essential ingredients. Dough needed time to rest. Yeast needed time to work. Flavor needed time to develop. But the Chorleywood process asked a bold question: what if we dramatically reduced that time? By using high-speed mixers, introducing oxygen, and optimizing production methods, the bread-making process became significantly faster. The result was bread that could be produced more quickly, more cheaply, in greater quantities. For many families, this brought obvious benefits. Bread became more accessible than ever before. Foods that once required hours of labor could now appear on store shelves at prices affordable to most people. In one sense, this was an extraordinary achievement. After all, bread's original purpose had always been to nourish humanity, and now technology was helping fulfill that purpose on an unprecedented scale. Yet, like every revolution, change also brought questions. When speed increases, what is lost? When convenience grows, do we lose something of the experience itself? When bread becomes an industrial product, does the ancient bond between baker and loaf remain intact? These are not simple questions, and perhaps they do not require simple answers. For history is rarely a battle between right and wrong. More often, it is a search for balance. Technology has helped millions gain easier access to food. That is something worth appreciating. Yet at the same time, many people have begun rediscovering traditional methods, rediscovering sourdough, rediscovering long fermentation, rediscovering the feeling of kneading dough by hand, rediscovering the slower rhythms that their ancestors once knew. This reminds me of one of Jung's most beautiful ideas. He believed that maturity does not come from choosing between the past and the future. It comes from connecting them, not rejecting the new, but not forgetting the old, not resisting progress, but maintaining a relationship with the things that shape our identity. Perhaps modern bread is telling exactly that story, a story of adaptation, of evolution without losing one's roots, of how an ancient food can continue accompanying humanity into an age of machines, the internet, and artificial intelligence. Because in the end, whether made with natural sourdough or commercial yeast, whether kneaded by hand or by machine, whether sold in a tiny neighborhood bakery or produced in a giant factory, bread remains bread, still wheat meeting water, still the miracle of fermentation, still the story of soil, time, and human labor. Technology did not replace bread. It simply helped bread reach more people. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of this chapter. The best inventions are not the ones that erase the past. They are the ones that allow the past to continue living in the present. But the journey of the loaf is still not over. For even after it leaves the oven, even after it reaches the table, even after it is sliced, it continues telling its story. A story written in the tiny sounds of a cooling crust, in the air pockets hidden within the crumb, in the golden brown color of the crust, in scientific secrets that few people ever notice. And that is where our journey will continue, the final science of the loaf. When we ended the previous chapter, bread had already entered the modern world alongside humanity. It had traveled through the wheat fields of antiquity, through clay ovens, through the crowded cities of Rome, through medieval monasteries, through industrial revolutions, through modern production lines. And now, a fresh loaf has just emerged from the oven. The journey appears complete. Yet strangely enough, for bread, it has never truly been the end. For even after baking is finished, the loaf continues living in its own way, continuing to change, continuing to tell its story, continuing to reveal secrets that only the most attentive observers notice. Perhaps you have heard this before. A loaf fresh from the oven sometimes produces tiny sounds, soft crackles, delicate little snaps that are almost impossible to hear in a noisy room. Bakers often say that this is when the crust is singing, a poetic description. Yet behind the poetry lies science, the great story of a loaf of bread. And so, after a long journey through thousands of years of history, we find ourselves returning to where it all began, a loaf of bread, an object so ordinary that most of us see it almost every day, a food so familiar that we often stop noticing it altogether. But now, after traveling together through humanity's first grain fields, the ancient ovens along the banks of the Nile, the crowded cities of Rome, medieval villages, artisan bakeries, and modern factories, perhaps we no longer see that loaf in quite the same way. Because a loaf of bread has never been merely bread. It is a story far older than the lifespan of any single human being. A story written by soil, weather, seeds, microorganisms, fire, time, and countless anonymous hands that lived and disappeared long before we were born. If we could look deeply enough into a loaf of bread, we would discover an entire world inside it. We would see the earth, not merely the soil beneath our feet, but the layers of earth that nourished wheat through countless seasons, soil that absorbed rain, fallen leaves, minerals accumulated over thousands of years. The earth is where everything begins. Carl Gustav Jung believed that modern people often forget their original relationship with nature. We live among concrete, glass, and steel. We look at screens more often than we look at the sky. Yet somewhere in the deepest layers of our souls, we still belong to the earth. We still belong to the natural world. Perhaps that is why things born from the soil carry such a special feeling. They remind us of our origins, of where we came from, of the most fundamental truths of life itself. But earth alone is not enough. A seed requires weather. It requires sunlight. It requires rain. It requires conditions that human beings can never fully control. Throughout history, every harvest has been a partnership between human effort and forces larger than ourselves. A farmer may plant the seed, but cannot command the rain, may care for the crop, but cannot control the sun, may work tirelessly, yet must still learn to accept uncertainty. This is a lesson our ancestors understood well, and perhaps it is a lesson we need to remember. Not everything in life exists within our control. Some things must be guided, and some things must simply be trusted. A loaf of bread always contains that balance between action and waiting, between effort and patience, between humanity and nature. And then there are the seeds, tiny grains of wheat that seem almost insignificant. Yet within those small grains lies the potential of entire civilizations. When we look back through history, we discover that the first cities were not built upon gold. They were built upon grain. Granaries appeared before palaces. Fertile fields appeared before mighty empires. Bread fed the builders, the soldiers, the merchants, the scholars, the artists, and the kings. In a very real sense, bread helped build the world we live in today. Yet there is another character in this story, one that humanity knew almost nothing about for most of its existence. Microorganisms. Creatures so small they remain invisible to the naked eye. For thousands of years, people baked bread without truly understanding what was happening inside the dough. They only knew that if they waited patiently, something miraculous would occur. The dough would rise, aroma would develop, the loaf would come alive. Today, science has given us answers, but those answers have not made the miracle any less miraculous. If anything, they make it even more astonishing, because life is always present around us in ways we rarely notice. Jung believed that much of what shapes human life exists beneath the surface of consciousness. The unconscious works quietly, yet profoundly. Microorganisms in bread are much the same, invisible, yet essential. Like so many important things in life, faith, love, memory, hope, we cannot hold them in our hands. Yet they remain present, shaping us every single day. And then, after earth, weather, seeds, and microorganisms, one final element arrives to complete the miracle: fire. The same fire that has accompanied humanity since its earliest days. The fire that warmed the first caves. The fire that illuminated ancient nights. The fire that allowed people to transform raw ingredients into food. Inside the oven, fire does not simply bake bread. It completes the transformation, turning potential into reality, turning ingredients into nourishment. And perhaps, in a deeper symbolic sense, fire also represents the trials every human being must endure in order to grow. Because like a loaf of bread, we too are shaped by the heat of life, by what we experience, by what we overcome. And that is what gives each of us our own unique flavor. Yet perhaps the most important ingredient of all still lies ahead. An ingredient that cannot be seen, cannot be weighed, cannot be bought, yet exists within every loaf ever made. Time. In the previous chapter, we traveled through soil, weather, seeds, microorganisms, and fire. But there is one ingredient even deeper than all of these. One that cannot be touched, cannot be stored, cannot be purchased. Time. If there is a true secret ingredient behind bread, perhaps it is time itself. Without time, seeds cannot sprout. Without time, wheat cannot mature. Without time, yeast cannot work. Without time, flavor cannot develop. And without time, civilization itself could never exist. Time is the only ingredient present in every stage of the journey. In the fields, In the granaries, inside the fermenting dough, within the oven, and within the memories of generations long gone. Perhaps that is why bread feels so much like life itself. Neither can be rushed too aggressively. Dough forced to rise too quickly rarely develops its full potential, and people forced to grow too quickly often struggle in the same way. Jung devoted much of his life to studying what he called individuation, the journey of becoming oneself. He believed true maturity does not happen in a single day. It emerges through years of experience, years of struggle, years of self-observation. Just as a loaf requires time to develop flavor, human beings require time to develop depth. And when we think about time, we inevitably think about the people who devoted their lives to bread, farmers rising before dawn, people planting seeds without knowing exactly how the harvest would unfold, people accepting uncertainty in exchange for hope, millers transforming grain into flour, bakers waking while entire cities still slept, mothers sharing the last piece of bread with their children, fathers carrying bread home after long days of labor. Every loaf contains human work, not merely physical labor, but patience, dedication, care, love. We often imagine civilization being built by kings, generals, and famous figures. Yet if we look more closely, civilization was also built by countless ordinary people, people who left behind no monuments, who never appeared in history books, yet who fed the world. A loaf of bread is a quiet tribute to all of them, and over thousands of years, bread became more than food. It became culture. Each people created its own bread. Each land told its own story through grain. The Italians have focaccia, the French have baguettes, the Germans have rye bread, the Indians have naan, the Ethiopians have injera, the Mexicans have tortillas. All different, yet all beginning from the same deeply human need, the need to nourish life. This always reminds me of one of Jung's most beautiful ideas. He believed that beneath countless cultural differences lies a shared layer of humanity, the collective unconscious, a place where all human beings meet, a place containing the oldest symbols, the oldest stories, the deepest needs. Perhaps bread is one of those symbols, for wherever it is made in the world, it represents the same thing: life, nourishment, sharing, connection. And then, from culture, bread enters the realm of memory. Perhaps each of us carries some memory connected to the smell of bread, a childhood morning, a kitchen, a loved one, a familiar bakery, a distant journey. Bread possesses a remarkable ability. It is not merely smelled, it is felt, remembered, relived. Jung believed memories do not live solely in the mind. They live in emotions, in symbols, in sensory experiences. That is why a single scent can reopen an entire world that has slept for years. A loaf of bread, therefore, contains more than starch. It contains memory. And from memory, we arrive at something even deeper: spirituality. Throughout human history, bread has appeared in sacred rituals, upon altars, at weddings, during harvest festivals, in moments when people searched for meaning beyond ordinary life, not by accident, but because bread embodies a miracle everyone can understand, from seed to life, from potential to reality, from the invisible to the visible. That is why bread became a symbol of grace, of gratitude, of connection between humanity and something greater than itself. And finally, after everything else, we arrive at science. Science explains how yeast works, how gluten forms, how the Maillard reaction creates aroma, how microorganisms transform dough. Yet the remarkable thing is that science does not diminish the wonder of bread. Quite the opposite. It deepens it. For the more we understand, the more extraordinary everything becomes. And perhaps this is where our entire journey converges. A loaf of bread is earth, weather, seed, microorganisms, fire, time, labor, culture, memory, spirituality, science. A loaf that appears simple is actually a record of thousands of years of human history. A book not written with words, but written with harvests, with hands, with dreams, with hopes, and with lives. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson bread can teach us, that the most extraordinary things are not always the most complicated. Sometimes they are hidden inside the simplest things: a loaf upon a table, a meal shared, a moment of gratitude, a small story that has lasted tens of thousands of years. And now, as our journey slowly comes to a close, perhaps you will never look at a loaf of bread in quite the same way again, because you now know that inside it there is more than flour and water. There is the history of humanity, the journey of civilization, and a small part of our own story as well.